Good evening. My name's Rob Strawn. I have the pleasure of serving as the Crawford Family Dean in the Williams School, and I'm happy to welcome you all here tonight. We've got a pretty full house, so that's always good to see. We're fortunate here at W&L to have a lot of really strong points about our university. Certainly a beautiful campus in a beautiful setting. We've got a curriculum that I would say blends the traditional and the contemporary in ways that would be the envy of a lot of schools. But at the end of the day, I think our strongest asset are the people here. And I've told folks in the past that if you look at so many of our best programs, it's a pretty simple recipe that we follow. It's exceptional students, it's a world-class faculty, and it's highly engaged alums. And if you mix those three in roughly equal measure, maybe give it a little stir, you'll see how often on this campus and in our field programs elsewhere, that results in some of the most exciting moments. And that's the spirit of the Executive in Residence program that was established in the Williams School quite some time ago. We try to bring to campus alums and friends of the university who have interesting stories to tell. And who can relate to our students and provide them some insight into some of the things that are going on in the world away from Lexington. And yes, there is a world away from Lexington, as hard as that may be to imagine. On some occasions, ideas are floated with those of us that are involved with the Executive in Residence program, possible visitors, and a name will surface, and we all kind of look at each other and almost in unison say, that's it. Absolutely, we've got to have that. And that brings us to tonight's guest, John Donaldson. John's name surfaced a couple of months ago in a conversation that several of us were having, and it was one that required very little in the way of convincing. As we looked at John, he brought together a background that was diverse: law, business, technology, innovation, really disruptive technology that has redefined entire industries. That's been a recurring theme in his career, the various stops that he's made. He's been in new firms, he's been in established firms, he's been in firms in transition. We felt like he would speak to an audience on this campus that came from many parts of the campus: the humanities, the law school, certainly the commerce school, and so on. And so we were excited about that. He has an understanding of the liberal arts that I think is good for our students to hear. If you've had an opportunity to read the article that's currently on the website about him, I pulled out one quote that I thought captured the value of the liberal arts and how it's manifest in his career. That his liberal arts education here, in his words, gives him the ability to use both his right and left brain to pull things together. He tells stories about how those in his firm recognize that as a unique, dare I say, gift that he has. And we'd like to think maybe we had a little bit to do with the development of that. He's also had really significant responsibilities in the various firms that he's worked for. And as I noted, in several cases, these are entities that have redefined their respective industries and, in fact, really forced other related industries to redefine how they approach their business. To give you a little background, John was not a C-school major. So we are happy to bring back folks who can present more than just business, accounting, economics, and politics. John was a history major here, graduated in 1992. He earned a law degree from some school in or around Charlottesville.
Trade school.
A trade, okay, very, very good. I'm not going to mention them by name. They get enough publicity as it is. Practiced law for a number of years in Atlanta, and later joined CNN. So here's one of the first examples of a firm that redefined an industry, although maybe that redefinition happened a little before you joined CNN, but was still in the process of imagining how media companies might evolve. Later, that morphed into Time Warner. While there, he handled mergers and acquisitions, strategy, and investments for Time Warner. Jump forward a few years, and he moves out west, hired by Microsoft. Now, Microsoft has actually transformed many industries. He worked, let me get this right, he headed up the business development strategy for Microsoft's interactive entertainment division. What that means to me is Xbox, right? So I feel like I have contributed through my two boys and maybe my own guilty pleasures involving Xbox. I've contributed a good deal to John's well-being. So you can say thanks later. Just over 2.5 years ago, he left Microsoft for Pandora. And again here, another company that's been part of an industry revolution. And at Pandora, he serves as Vice President of Corporate Development and Strategy. He's going to speak with us tonight about the streaming wars and the future of music, something that the students here may think of as fairly routine. Those of us that have a few more years under our belt really think of this as revolutionary. And it'll be interesting to see how the industry continues to evolve and redefine itself. So please join me in welcoming home John Donaldson.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thanks for coming out tonight. It's funny, Dean Strong, when you say welcome home, I've lived all over the place and have had the chance to come back to WNL a couple of times more recently over the last few months. And boy, it really does feel like home. It is so great to be back. I got a text on the way up to one of the classes this morning from one of my classmates who had seen in the newsletter that I was here, and he said, "Do you know that the last time you spoke at WNL was in 1992?" And it happened to be at the almost 25 years exactly at the 92 mock convention where we closed it out and dropped the gavel. And so it's a little daunting to think that it's been a quarter century, but it's great to be back. This is definitely a more sober crowd than I saw the last time I spoke at WNL, which is great. I have to use this slide. Anybody in here over 40 hopefully will recognize the illusion, but I learned pretty early you can't give a music presentation without a Spinal Tap reference. And here we have dials that go to 11. We hope we'll have an 11 level discussion tonight. So I wanted to walk you through, this is the history major in me, but just to sort of give you some context for how the music industry has developed. I have to say, before I joined Pandora, I thought that video games and that ecosystem was the most screwed up ecosystem I'd worked in professionally, and then I got into music. It is a really challenging landscape. There are a variety of different players that have different interests. The music industry has gone through a really tumultuous time over the last 15 or 20 years. And I think it's important just to take a look at kind of how we got to where we are in order to understand where we might be heading. So, just to start in terms of how are we consuming music today? As I put this together, I'll confess I was a little bit surprised by how people are listening to audio. If you look at, basically folks 13 and up, if you starting on the right-hand side, still the largest way music is consumed is by AM/FM radio. The same broadcast towers that your great-grandparents probably saw long ago are still the dominant way that most people consume audio. Still surprised to be, even though I've been in this a while, I thought it would be a lower percentage. And then moving over to the left-hand side, you look and you see you've got owned music, and those are downloads, those are CDs, that's about 15%. Streaming audio is now 15%, and then you get into the smaller categories. You've got satellite radio, you've got podcasts. It's a pretty diverse set of distribution systems that exist. What's amazing, though, is that Americans listen to 22 hours of music per week, which is a pretty stunning number when you compare it to just about anything else of how they spend time. Now, it has the advantage of being largely a passive activity, so you do it when you run, you do it when you're in the car, when you're studying, but it's still an incredibly important content source for Americans. The good news is we're listening to more music than ever. It is as important a cultural touchstone as any other medium form. It's not without its problems, though. In the U.S., only 20% of Americans spend any money on music. They don't buy concert tickets, they don't buy CDs, they don't have a music subscription. So you've got a disproportionate number of Americans that are enjoying music, they're just not paying for it. And likewise, as is reflected here, that's had huge consequences for the music industry. The revenues peaked in 1999 at about $15 billion. They're right around $7.5 billion now. So dramatic collapse of an industry. It's hard to find an analog of a business that's gone through that much of a contraction and still exists. But it really informs a lot of how the world works today. That backdrop is really important to keep in mind as you think about new distribution models for music. It's in the context of a dramatic collapse of an industry. So just going back a little further in time, you probably don't recognize anything on this slide, but we'll start on the left-hand side. Radio comes into wide commercial use in the 20s, and it's the first time that recorded music really comes into the home. It was as transformative as any other new technology introduced commercially in the U.S. It sort of created this notion of communal listening around the radio. And it was about 20 years later, right after World War II, when the phonograph, turntable, record player took off in terms of mainstream adoption. And that was a real shift because for the first time, people were able to play their own music at home. They didn't have to wait for the DJ to spin a song. And it also created this environment and this ecosystem between the radio business and the record companies. And the deal was, you promote me on the radio and I'll give you the music for free because I just want to sell albums. That's the only way I'm making money. If you can throw some ads against the content on the radio, that's great. But we'll take all of the revenues from the product side. Moving forward into the 60s, tape decks arose. What's interesting about that is it for the first time allowed music to be really portable. It's tough to throw a turntable in the backseat of your car. It also allowed people to record for the first time. And so that in itself was very transformative. And then you get into the 80s when the CD was invented. And the CD created something that was really pretty unique in that the sound quality improved pretty dramatically. The form factor was much smaller. And it led to a phenomenal replacement rate for both for both albums and for cassettes. And it's one that really the record industry rode up until the late 90s. People were ditching their old records and their cassettes and putting everything into these shiny new discs. And what was interesting about this evolution is that at every point along the way here, the record industry made more money. Every new format that came out allowed the industry to prosper even more. And so that was the context. So there was a real appetite for new distribution technologies, new formats among the industry because it led to a replacement cycle, which meant more money. I wanted to flash back way long ago, 1992. This is what the best in breed music service looked like in 1992. You will not recognize this. You guys will. In between Domino's and the Palms, there's a little storefront. And in the 90s, there was this legendary Lexington character, Wayne, who ran Night Owl. And Wayne's business, was largely CDs at this point. He had the genius of allowing for parents to create an account at there. So you could go, my parents were never going to do that, but my overindulged roommate had an account there, and he would every week go buy another CD, one or two. And I'd walk home and I'd push the button on our answering machine that was blinking, and it would be Wayne. And it would be Wayne from Night Owl Music. This is a message for Jeff Roberts. We have your new Widespread Panic CD. And every day I'd come in and there'd be another one, and it would be Stevie Ray Vaughan. And you kind of named the bands of that era. And that was, each of those cost $16.99, and he never saw that bill, and so he amassed quite a collection. This isn't him, although I swear it could have been him. He walked out of, at the end of 4 years, he had a big portfolio of discs, which is certainly better than records, but it's still not exactly, music at your fingertips. But that was sort of the way it was in the 90s. And, as I said, it was a tremendous boom for the industry. By 99, 82% of all sales were CDs. These things were going out the door. You didn't really have the option of buying a single. You had to basically put your money down and take your chances and hope that you liked what it was you just spent a lot of money on. So that's backdrop. Those were the salad days. We are now entering into a really tumultuous era for music. Each of those formats, as I said, just continued to add more revenues to the industry. We get to 99 and 2000, and this format called the MP3 emerges. And I could probably talk for an hour about that. It was a hard-fought standards wars in the 90s. There were a bunch of competing file formats that could have been the de facto music format, but Dr. Brandenburg there, who was a scientist in Germany, came up with this way of encoding and decoding file formats that could take an 80 meg song off of your CD and compress it into sort of a 4 to 5 meg file form. And that, coupled with broadband being adopted, made it really, really easy to share music in ways that were not intended, I think, by the original file format. So you had Winamp, which was a media streaming app that came out. The encoding and decoding software was illegally leaked on the internet. It allowed for the creation of peer-to-peer networks. And suddenly you've got Napster on the scene, and you've got sons of Napster that have sprung out. Some of these are still around, but basically, all of a sudden there is this massive move towards peer-to-peer file sharing, and the industry not only didn't see it coming, but took probably longer than they would have liked to react to it. And in fairness, it was one of those things that happened really quickly. It spread, as you guys could guess, among young people first, but then became really pervasive, and it had an almost immediate impact on the industry. In one sort of bright note, the Apple iPod came out in 2001. The great news for the industry was that it, for once, kind of got people back in the mindset of paying for music. The convenience that it afforded, the fact that you could just go to iTunes and download what you wanted. You didn't have to monkey around with different peer-to-peer networks. Just made it really easy. And this was really the shift in earnest from analog to digital in music when it came to how we listen to it. A couple of downsides. Apple, in the course of launching this, effectively blew up the album concept. So the $16.99 CD suddenly became an a la carte menu of 99 to $1.29 songs. So that was a big shift. The other bit was they didn't put the DRM restrictions on other content that folks in the industry wanted. So you have a situation where a few years after this, 2005, 2006, when you looked at teenagers' iPods, they had something like, on average, about 800 illegally downloaded tracks. So the industry missed out on this massive wave of moving from CDs to MP3 file formats. This began, a long road to recovery. And the iPod, it's hard to understate how significant it was in terms of changing how people listen to music around the world. About the same time, mid-2000s, you see music streaming emerge. Pandora was probably the first of the mainstream services. We took it a path to really focus on internet radio. So different than a lot of what you now see in the on-demand space. We were lucky to have done 3 or 4 different versions of Pandora before we went into the consumer space. We'd focused on some business applications for the music genome. We tried a couple different things, but got lucky in that we got some early word of mouth adoption for Pandora. It was a pretty, I remember being at Microsoft and one of my colleagues came in and said, you should really try this out, because you can just put in a song and then it'll start playing other songs like it. And it really was cool. It was a long way away from a business at that point, though, because we have content licensing costs that we needed to build a business around. And so we looked at subscriptions for a while. We decided to build an ad-supported product, which has taken a long time to build that infrastructure up. But streaming becomes, I'd say at this point, it's still a bit of a novelty. Moving forward a couple more years, you do actually have some actual companies that could be, your digital replacement for CDs. So we talked about Napster and iTunes. Rhapsody has been around forever, still about the same size as they were. YouTube, of course, you guys know well, I'm sure, really became almost an on-demand service that was available. Spotify launched in 2008. It wasn't until 2012 that they were here, but Spotify was the first to really come out in a big way and say, dump your CDs, sign up for basically the full canon of Western music, 25 million songs, pay us $9.99 a month, which was kind of an arbitrary number. My roommate was spending $60 in CDs, and that would for him have been the greatest bargain of all time to spend $120 a year and get every song he'd ever thought about. But this was beginning to emerge in the mid 2000s. The introduction of the iPhone in 2008 is also a pretty landmark event for music. Pandora got lucky, I'd say, in some ways, in that we were an incumbent music service at a time when there wasn't a lot of other good options from streaming. We also made a big bet that Apple was going to transform music again, and so we built an app before most of the other services did, and we're able to ride, the adoption there up from, what had been a really small non-web listening that we had on Pandora to really flip it entirely the other way with Android coming out as well. In 2 years we went from being mostly web to being 80% mobile, and this brought basically all of your streaming music in your pocket wherever you were, and was really, really disruptive in the mid 2000s. And as is Silicon Valley's want, they saw a trend and decided to jump back on it. A lot of investors put money in the early 2000s when peer-to-peer people were trying to figure that out. There was a massive retrenchment away from music, but in the mid 2000s, a bunch of companies, sprung up. Many self-proclaimed Pandora killers, but it was a pretty wild time, just not that long ago, less than 10 years ago, with lots of companies jumping into music. And I was talking to one of the classes today. Music attracts a lot of vanity investors. It's like sports. There are people that buy things in those areas just so they can hang out with athletes and rock stars. And we have certainly found that through the years, that people are really passionate about music. But they haven't quite put the pieces together from a business standpoint. So this is what the world looked like. You can guess how many of these are still around. I'm sure nobody's listened to Bod Pop and Chart U and Fine Tune Mr. Tracks. So it was an exciting, but as you'll see, this was also a time when the industry was at war across the board, and it was a civil war. You had labels suing other labels. You had publishers trying to get a bigger share of the pie, the pie that had shrunk pretty dramatically. The labels and publishers went pretty hard after all new music services to try to get equity stakes, to try to get what they felt like was the right licensing commitment. And a lot of those companies just couldn't make it given the content costs. We pay about 50% of our revenues right off the top to content and rights owners, which we're happy to do. As you move up into full on-demand services like Spotify and Tidal, they pay closer to 70 or 75%. So a lot of those companies that you saw on the prior screen just didn't have the funding necessary to build out a service. I'd say, at this point too, Pandora was kind of dead in the crosshairs of the industry across the board. It was artists, it was publishers, it was labels, all of whom felt like we had exploited. We have a different licensing scheme that we operate under relative to most other services. That's perversely, it's set by the government. It's a legacy of the early internet days, but effectively, our rates are set by the government, and every 5 years, we go and negotiate with a very small group of judges in the basement of the Library of Congress to set our rates for the next year. And we're on one side, and you've got all of the labels on the other, and industry groups. And so we just got through that this past year. Our rates, went up, but not probably as much as folks would have liked. But the company really went through a pretty tough time, and frankly, some of that was self-inflicted. We could have done more to engage with the industry, but it's taken us. I joined. This article is actually from 2013. I joined in 2014, and there was really a massive shift in the company's culture and attitude that we really need to be partners with the industry. For a variety of reasons. For us, it was we wanted to expand our product portfolio, so we needed to have direct deals. We wanted to move internationally, and so the licensing that we had in the US wouldn't carry over. This was, I think, in my mind, kind of the nadir among the ecosystem's war with itself. And as that's happening, a lot of the smaller companies disappeared. They couldn't get funding. That most of them went out of business. And at the same time, you had Google come into the market with Google Play. They'd been there with YouTube. You had Apple Music come out just more recently. And then Amazon has continued to launch new music services through Prime. And what's interesting about this is you've got three companies here, arguably the three richest, most powerful tech companies on the planet, all of whom are attracted to music, but not from a pure music business standpoint. They care about music because it sells other stuff. So Google obviously sells tons of ads. That's why they're in the music business, so they can put ads against it primarily, although they do have a subscription service. You've got Amazon that wants to get you become a Prime member and buy more stuff. And then Apple, of course, has used it, to great success to move hardware. And so the industry really now phases itself at this point with those three main players, plus probably us and Spotify. They've gone through this tremendous, contraction of the industry where revenues have gone basically down by half. Their old distribution arm in the form of record stores went out of business. That's Tower. You probably don't remember it, but it used to be all over the place. It closed completely in 2006. So that's the world, that kind of leads up to where we are today. Some trends. The shift from owning music to renting it is only accelerating at this point. This is just from a couple of days ago. That download business is falling off a cliff. It is going away. I think Apple realized that probably 2 or 3 years ago, that the writing was on the wall, and so that's when they got into streaming. And if you look at what's happened more recently, you'll see revenues have been largely flat, although we're forecasting this year to be the first kind of significant uptick in a long time. And just the split between streaming, grew from 34% to 47% this year in terms of revenue. So I think where we are is we're at the bottom of the curve, and I think we're on an upswing now as streaming becomes recognized by the labels as something that's good, as you begin to see just more adoption of streaming services than I think most people had forecast. We feel like we're on the upswing, which is a good position after a lot of tough years. So just to look at the streaming marketplace in the US, you have Pandora is the largest. Our our users are primarily ad-funded users, so they don't pay anything. They listen to an occasional ad or two. We do have about 4 million subscribers to the Pandora One subscription service, which is basically the same product, just no ads. Spotify's numbers are actually a little higher. This is from a few months ago. As I said, streaming has taken off more pervasively than people thought. It's closer to 40 million subscribers in the US. Of those, about 17 million actually pay something for it. Just out of curiosity, how many folks in this room subscribe to a music service? Okay. How many of you guys think that you're paying the full freight for it, as opposed to like not being on a family plan or a trial or? Okay. So I mean, it's interesting because the growth has happened at the user level. The revenues have picked up a lot, but they're not tracking that. And so, a lot of these are promotional subscriptions. They're friends and family or family plans. So it's a little misleading. It's not all $9.99 a month. If you average it out, it probably comes closer to $5.50 or $5.60 a month in terms of revenue per subscriber. And then you got SoundCloud. You guys, I'm sure, are familiar with them. Really interesting company that does a lot of user-generated music, playlists. A lot of DJs use it. It's really kind of still trying to figure out whether it wants to be a subscription or an advertising business, but immensely popular around the world. Google, iHeart, and then TuneIn is the last there. So I think it's useful just to talk about a couple of trends and that are really impacting both content owners and distributors. Live events have become the principal revenue driver for most musicians. It used to be they would go on tour to promote that new album, so just to get as much exposure to that as possible. What's happened in the last 15 years is that the revenue that they used to get from products has been replaced largely by service revenues from touring. So about 80% of revenues of income for artists, and this is true of Beyonce, who went on 3 world tours last year, to the local troubadour at the coffee shop. It's about, they have kind of replaced an IP business with a services business, which is, as an old software guy, is not the way you typically want to go. You want to productize services, but it has been really, it's been the only way they've been able to offset the decline in recording revenues. The other interesting trend with live events specifically is that, in 2000, it used to be that the top 100 artists took by far the lion's share of the revenues, the people that were playing arenas, playing stadiums. But over time, what's happened is, between the growth of more venues, more people going to more shows, festivals, the pie itself has grown, but it's created a much bigger opportunity for the longer tail of artists that aren't going to be playing at Levi Stadium in San Francisco. They're going to be playing at a 500 to 1,000 person venue. So for even artists as big as Beyonce, they've got to hit the road. Another big trend has been consolidation, and this has come across the board. So you've seen labels consolidate. There used to be, in the mid-90s, there were 9 or 10 labels. There's now effectively 3 plus 1 independent group or association of independent labels. The number of people that have left the music business is pretty staggering. They were able, even with that contraction from 15 billion to 7 billion, they were able to hold their margins pretty tight. And so I think that's one thing that people think. It's like, tech people, there's always this tension between tech and media people. Tech people tend to assume that they just were terrible business people and kind of let this happen to themselves. But they actually managed that contraction really well, considering. And unfortunately, the way they did that was by firing lots of marketing and A&R people. And so you've seen like a much smaller group of effectively gatekeepers that control who gets signed, who gets promoted. You've seen it certainly in the live event space. Live Nation and Ticketmaster merged about 5 years ago. Live Nation has bought up as many different venues and promoters as they can under the antitrust rules. Ticketmaster now has about an 80% share of ticketing in the US. You've seen smaller streaming services get bought by bigger ones. Apple bought Beats a couple of years ago. We bought Rdio. And I think, we've talked about this, but you've also seen this consolidation of distribution into these three juggernaut companies. Another trend that we've been watching closely is just how important data has become to connect, bands, brands, and fans. So, that's something that Pandora has invested in a lot through the years. We've got a data science team that built the original algorithm for how we select songs, but we've also invested a lot just in terms of being able to predict new artists, based on trends that we've seen with other artists, how they're performing on Pandora, how they're performing on social media. Spotify and Google have both made investments there. And then you've seen some concert data apps that have done some innovative things in terms of being able to predict how attractive or how interested you might be in a live event that's coming to your neck of the woods. So we looked at these trends, and I joined Pandora in 2014, and our task was really to come in and think about what does the next generation of the business look like. Pandora had been in the prior 10 years just maniacally focused on three things: growing listeners, growing listening hours, and driving ad revenue. And the management team was very much like, if whatever initiative you're bringing to me doesn't drive meaningfully one of those three things, I have no interest in hearing about it. And as somebody who's been with other startup companies and seen how easy it is to get drawn to bright shiny objects, I have a lot of respect for that kind of focus. And frankly, it's the only reason there's an opportunity for me to work for Pandora, is because that core business was so heavily invested in. So I think in terms of where we want to head as a company, we see the world consolidating. We see there's not going to be 45 different music services. I think there's going to be less than 10. And so for us, the decision was whether you invest to become a global player or you try to find a home for the business. And I think we decided we wanted to go. We wanted to compete on the global stage, to be the one-stop shop for music. And we think we have some unique assets. We've got 80 million monthly unique users. We've got a treasure trove of data about both live and recorded music preferences. We've got a renewed engagement with the artists community. So we've opened up a product called the Artist Marketing Platform, which allows artists to sign up and see exactly where all of their fans are. So they can see how their new track's performing. They can see, hey, I'm planning a tour. I'm thinking about going to the Bay Area. I'd like to know whether I have more fans in Oakland than San Jose. And I've sat with artists as they've seen this, and they literally have not one idea where their fans are. It's the only feedback they get is sort of fan clubs and mailing lists. But we can say you've got 400,000 people that have created a station based on your work that are in this general vicinity. And so we've actually had artists that have decided they're going to play 2 nights in San Jose and skip San Francisco altogether. So opening up that kind of data has been a real boon for both artists and for us in getting better relationships there. And then on the promotion side, because we have so much data, we know how to serve people the right ads. We also knew how to serve the right announcements for concert venues, because we can see where your preferences are, how likely it would be for you to buy a ticket. We're integrating in-app purchasing on Pandora, so you can get a notification and buy your couple of tickets for a show. So we decided to make a big bet really in 2015 and move from more or less a single product company that's based in the U.S. We do have the services available in Australia and New Zealand, but that was sort of a legacy quirk how we wound up there, and really being concentrated on radio to to really trying to be that global music platform, bringing the supply and the demand side together in one spot. And so we've obviously added this ticketing functionality. We bought a company called Ticketfly in San Francisco that really goes after venues that are in the mid-tier. They're not competing for the arenas, but they're places like the Fox theaters across the country, really dedicated music venues that bring a lot of emerging artists in. And so they'll have 4 or 5 shows a week. Ticketfly is a web-based product that we've bought and have continued to run, but have been bringing in their concert information into Pandora. We absolutely want to expand beyond the markets that we're in. We have now direct deals with the labels, so we have an avenue to do that. It's obviously a much different market than in 2008 when we rode the wave of the iPhone, and so we have to think about it differently. And then last, we are dedicated to music. We get asked all the time if we want to get into video, if we want to do other sorts of media, and we're committed to it. We're committed, though, to offer a full on-demand product, so that will launch in about 3 weeks. And so it'll leverage a lot of the easy and highly personalized functionality that exists within the core product. Will fund or will drive the new products that are coming out. So thinking about what's ahead, a couple trends, and then I'd love to take some questions here. A couple things. So there are a bunch of new revenue models that are emerging right now. You guys have probably heard about Kickstarter campaigns and seen some of the things in music. Neil Young did a Kickstarter campaign. He raised $5 million to build a new, better sounding MP3 player called Pono. Other artists, Amanda Palmer raised $1 million through Kickstarter to do a new album. They're the one-off kind of crowdsourced things, and then there are some other services like there's a company called Patreon. There's one called Pledge Music. I think about those as more like a subscription service for engagement with the band that you love. So you can go up and effectively subscribe to an artist, and you'll get things like they'll stream performances to you. They'll do Q&A. There's some artists that will do Skype guitar lessons. You can buy specialty merch, and so there are some new models there. I mean, Kickstarter music is still the most funded category, and so we think that's going to stick around. On the brand side, American Eagle, has built its brand around music and connecting to millennials through that. They have really rich in-store music that they license. They also make the music available for free, and so they're funding new and emerging artists that way. They have their own Discover Spotlight on Spotify. And then on the sponsorship side, historically, brands have been a little skeptical outside of sports to get too deep into sponsoring live events. I think because millennials and because Gen Z really values these experiences more than things, advertisers have quickly moved to find sponsorship opportunities in the live space. And so that was one of the reasons, because we have so many relationships with brands, that we felt like sponsorships for Ticketfly venues makes a ton of sense, and we're starting to see some success there. There's also new kinds of content. There's this company, Musical.ly, which my kids have used. I don't know if it's made its way around here, but launched last year. They've got 90 million users in like 8 months. It's basically short form videos of yourself lip syncing or singing karaoke that you can share with your friends. Your friends like it. They can give you a gift. They can buy you a present, which I'm kind of like, yeah. And then I read, well, the top 10 streamers on there make 25 grand a week, which is pretty staggering. When you think about that and how quickly and how pervasive it's been. I don't know. We'll see if it sticks. We've certainly seen other, communication, social media services that have flashed and then disappeared. Twitter just shut down Vine. but it's one that we've all been just shaking our heads how quickly it's grown. And so the pace of innovation continues. Augmented reality and virtual reality are like the hottest of the hot buzzwords around the Bay Area right now. And I think everybody is trying to figure out exactly what that means. When I was at Microsoft at Xbox, I worked a lot on the HoloLens, which is their wearables play. And I think the consensus is that wearables and augmented reality or virtual reality, that's the next generation mobile phone. That's the next platform that all of the big players are trying to win. I think it's an open question exactly how music fits in there. We've talked to a bunch of companies that are doing live streaming of concerts. This is a YouTube and Apple project that they did on Facebook not too long ago, but it gives you a sense of, you can position yourself around stage, and there are some apps out there where you can sing duets with stars. I think there will be a market for some sort of live streaming of events that's really immersive. It's a little less clear to me exactly how kind of core listening plays out there, because in most cases it's passive. You're doing something else, and the whole nature of at least virtual reality is that you are focused on whatever is 6 inches in front of you. So we'll see how all of that plays out. But it's exciting, and we're doing prototypes. We're trying to figure out exactly what our play is there. And then I think the thing that Tim Westergren, our founder and CEO, is most excited about is really growing. This is a quick, hard to see chart of how artists fit in the spectrum. Most artists are nobody's ever heard of, and then you have gradually smaller, promising, established, mainstream, and a very small group of epic artists that can fill stadiums. A lot of the services, not just Pandora, have really made an effort to try to get more prominence for undiscovered artists. Spotify has its Discover Weekly. We do a lot of artists to watch. We do a lot of predictions based on trends that we see. So, as an example, we were able to spot Iggy Azalea before she really broke, and we were able to track that through her performance on Pandora, and saw just this tidal wave of new interest in her. And so we were able to work with her before she got really big, and did a concert series with her. We brought brands in. They were thrilled. They got the sort of halo effect of working with her. They didn't spend $5 million. And so we're going to do more and more of that. But I think all of the services are really trying to help artists, find that audience. Tim, our founder, had spent about 5 years rolling around in a van with an indie band in the 90s, and had, tells stories about having to, he shows up in a college town, he gets out the flyers, puts them up on the telephone poles, and 6 people show up, and they've got 6 people in a van in the band, and how unsustainable that was. And so for him, it's really a passion to try to grow the overall pie, and I think that's where we're headed. I think I think all of the services are really focused on independent artists, and creating a middle class that can be musicians professionally. So I think that's it. Thanks, guys. I'm guessing there's some questions.
Who do you view as your biggest competition?
So the question was who we view as our biggest competition. I would put in the category, I'd say it's Spotify, Apple, Google, and Amazon at this point. I think I spoke to some of the classes today. I think there was a much sharper distinction between all of these services maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Like, hey, we're just internet radio. No, we do downloads. No, we just do full on demand. I think practically these things are all converging together, and consumers, frankly, don't care about the licensing distinctions between the two. They want one place to go when they're feeling engaged, and they want to listen to that song over and over again. They want that kind of functionality, but a lot of times they're in the car or they're studying, and the sort of serve to them, lean back is just fine. So I think those are the big five at this point. I'd say also, we still compete in the ad business pretty aggressively with terrestrial radio. So we definitely view them as a competitor. You've got Sirius XM, which people are, it amazed me when I saw they have 26 million subscribers that pay like around $20 a month for that service. Like, that's a lot of subscribers. Like that is a big business. So, to the extent that you can only consume so much music, we compete with all those guys that way. Sure. Go ahead.
All right. So you mentioned how terrestrial radio has like about 50% of the usership. Like, what sort of role do you envision in the future for AM/FM radio? Do you think that it'll evolve, that it's kind of an antiquated formula that people have just latched onto because it's in their cars, or do you think that it'll try to adapt through internet or whatever?
It's a great question. I mean, I think there's going to be 25 years ago, when you guys have kids, you're going to have radio in the car. I think you're going to have AM/FM radio, that it will still exist in some capacity. I think we've fought really hard to get into the car because there's so much radio listening that happens there. And our objective is to get to parity with the dial, because it's the easiest possible solution to hear music is just to turn the dial, right? We're not there yet. I mean, we've invested more than most folks in terms of getting ahead of the 5 to 7 year cycles with cars. Like, these guys are planning, 20, 23 cars at this point, and so you make real long-term bets. I think that you're going to see more encroachment. I mean, Google and Apple are both making aggressive car plays right now. I think you're seeing more and more connected cars. I think that's still a few years out. Most of our listeners use a Bluetooth or an aux cable to listen to it in the car. It's definitely not at parity with AM/FM radio, but it's mostly good enough. But we're going to continue to chip away, hopefully, at their share. But I think there are a ton of people that love that format. They like DJs. They like to hear the local sports and weather. They like the native advertising, where you have the DJ saying, "Hey, I just got this Craftmatic bed. Run down to Sleep Train." So I think you're going to see more convergence as well. Like, one of the things that I've pushed our folks to think about, we should be simulcasting them. We have I don't know how many different genres of music. I don't fully get why you want to listen to KFOG instead of a really personalized station for you, but people do, and we may as well, if we can figure out the right economics with the terrestrial guys and the license holders, we may well do that. Yeah.
What do you think of the recent boom in the sale of vinyl records?
I don't think it's going to make up the $7.5 billion that they lost in the last 15 years. I mean, I'm a little bit of a skeptic. I feel like it is a connoisseur's approach. I love vinyl, I really do, but like, I'm 45. I don't have time to get it all crafted and just sew. And we've got 4 kids running around, so a turntable is just a bad idea in general. So I think it's a little bit like the high definition streaming. There is definitely a market for it. I just don't think it's very big, and I don't think it's going to be, relative to the mass market. I don't think it's going to move the needle that much.
So it's nice to hear that Pandora is interested in growing the music industry. And you talked about all these entities tonight, but the one group you haven't talked about is the group that got banged the hardest by the digital downloading, and that's the songwriters. And they're the ones that have had the biggest sort of tension in your organization. So I wonder if you could speak to what you're doing about that, or where you think that's going, because they're the ones creating the backstory.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So our relationship with songwriters has been complicated. It is a complicated ecosystem between the songwriters and the collection agencies and the labels. And the labels, you basically have 3 labels now. You've got Universal, Warner, and Sony. Each of them has a publishing arm that they license out the song compositions out to digital services. I'd say, the label, so these combinations now of labels and publishers, there aren't that many independent, I mean, there are plenty of independent publishers, but a lot of the catalogs are controlled by the same people that own the recording rights. And so there's a little bit of, well, why are you paying 50% for the recording side, but only 2 or 5% for the composition side? But in fact, that money is going to the same, I mean, it's going to the same controlling entity. From our perspective, we have duked it out with songwriters in different formats. We've paid what we were obligated to. We actually just entered into direct deals with all the major publishers last year, so sort of arm's length deals with them. Their rates have gone up. Our rates, we're paying more that way. So I actually feel, this sort of streaming wars is not, it's not the gentlest of titles, but I feel like we're kind of in a détente and actually sort of a rebirth that way. But it's a tension, I mean, if you were to design a perfect world, I mean, just so you know, so like, more or less, the person that owns the recording, so when Led Zeppelin recorded this Stairway to Heaven, the person that owns that, they're going to take, of $1 of licensing fees, they're going to take about 75% of that, 80% in most cases, and then the remainder will go to the songwriter, so the person that actually wrote the song. And it's really, really complicated because I don't know if you probably don't remember, but a few years ago, David Bowie sold his catalog of compositions to a bunch of investors. So he got $1 billion payout, and they used it as basically an annuity because they knew people will be listening to Major Tom for years to come. But what it's done is it's created a financial market for all these rights. And so one of the things we really struggle with is like, we don't even know who to pay. We want to be good citizens and compliant, but there are like 16 different owners, fractional owners of one song. And so the collection agencies help that way, but it's true on the recorded side as well. It's just, there's not great metadata. If you want to be compliant, it's not really easy, just given the fractional nature of how it's controlled at this point.
Well, then is there a really good opportunity? I mean, you mentioned sort of the budding artists and whatnot, and you've got all this all these data capabilities. Is there an opportunity to take newer artists or undiscovered artists and present them to the world using some of this data tracking, but then also extract higher margins as a function of that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, if I were to have put an additional, sort of forecasting the future, I would have put, a question mark around what's going to get disintermediated next. And I think you're definitely seeing the stranglehold that the labels have had on breaking new artists, that has loosened up a lot. Artists, the role of the label initially was to find the artists. So you got A&R guys going to clubs and trying to find the next Jimi Hendrix, and then of course you sign them, you finance them, you get the record made, and then they used to have armies of guys that would drive around to radio directors all over the country and say, "This is the new hottest thing. You should definitely get it in regular rotation." And so, at this point, it's the discovery side. We have a lot of data. We have some predictive tools. We feel like, over time, we'll be better at finding the next Iggy Azalea. On the promotion side, there are lots of services that can promote new artists. Whether it's us, whether it's Facebook, Spotify, there are new avenues that weren't available before. And then the financing side, labels will typically put up the money for that, and that feels like something. I mean, money follows opportunity. There's no magic color of money that comes out of the labels. So, I think over time you're going to see their role decline. Now they own these massive catalogs, so they're a little bit. They're like people that own big IP portfolios. They don't have to create anything new necessarily to still be incredibly impactful in their ecosystem. But I do think you're going to see, that on the recorded side, with labels potentially losing their influence, and then on the live side, I didn't have a slide of it, but if you've ever seen kind of how your $120 ticket to go see the Zac Brown band gets divided, it's a pretty unbelievable number of fingers in that pot. It's everything from the artists themselves to their manager, to their promoter, to their agent, to the venue, to the ticketing company, to the guys that park the cars, to the guys that pour the beer. I mean, there's just a massive number of people that are in that. And that also, to me, feels like one that over time, as artists get more tools and take maybe more ownership, that they're not as reliant on a lot of the middlemen along the way. So it'll be fascinating to watch the next 10 years with that. Sure.
What is your opinion on artists who are choosing not to put their music on streaming services?
I think it depends on whether they're windowing or whether they're absolutely against it. I mean, you've seen a lot of artists that have said, you've got some older artists, they're like, my music's never going to be on there. Well, it is, over time, the money was incentive enough for them to come on. You've seen others that are like, I don't want my new album, I'm going to do all physical or I'll download. So Taylor Swift a year or two ago did her release that way. I think that as the money grows, that will take care of itself. I think they're going to want to be on there because the alternatives aren't going to look very good. I think in terms of exclusives and windowing, I think exclusives are challenging because it's a really bad customer experience. Like if you've signed up for your service and you can't get all the music that you thought, it's aggravating. And Tidal, the Jay-Z's streaming service, did an exclusive not too long ago, and it did drive incremental subscribers for Tidal. It also created the most pirated version of any new CD last year because people couldn't get it. I'm like, I've already paid my $10 a month to Spotify. Why do I need to go buy that? That's taking me in the wrong direction. And so, as a consequence, it hit all of the torrent sites right away, and the industry lost. So the labels hate it. And Universal, as an example, has said we're not allowing any of our artists under contract to do exclusives with the music services. I think there is an opportunity for windowing. So maybe you don't get the day and date access to new music, but it comes into the system over time. That feels like a more sustainable approach. But I think the whole industry is trying to figure it out right now. Yep.
I got kind of a multi-part question. So you worked in a lot of other industries. And so my first question is, why on earth did you pick the music industry to move into? And secondly, once you did choose the music industry, how did you get up to speed on how many variables there are? Like you talk about touring revenue, so you know all of the percentages and where it all goes to and all of the different players throughout. Like how did you get up to speed on the complexity of the industry?
I'll see if I can answer both parts here. So when I was at Xbox and Microsoft over the last 15 years, they've probably spent $10 billion on music, on trying to figure out how to crack the code on music. So there was the Zune player, which was an obvious debacle there, right? Anybody still uses Zune? Probably not. They bought a couple of companies. They created their own music service. When I was there, we launched Xbox Music, and that has morphed into Groove, I think, now. And we got to a point when I was there that even as many users as Xbox had through Xbox Live, we found absolutely it wasn't moving the needle at all. Like the numbers were really small. And so we thought about, should we go try to buy something? And we looked at all of the companies out there. I spent about 6 months kind of doing landscaping work and strategy work and trying to assess what might be the best fit for us. And candidly, the P&Ls for most of those companies were just ungodly bad. Like they just, we didn't look at Pandora because it was too big. I don't think anybody wanted to take Steve Ballmer at that time, a $5 billion music deal. And so I was pretty down on the music space as a business. My dad gave me a great lesson. He was a big sailor when I was growing up, and he wanted to combine his passion with his employment and started a sailing. He had a marina and a bunch of services that are all boat related. And after like 5 or 6 years of that, I mean, he got completely obliterated in that business and was like, here's the lesson: never follow your passion into business. And I've actually sort of agree, like, it's healthy to know that. I was not one of those people that was so like in love with music that I had to get into it. One of my colleagues from Xbox left and came to Pandora and said, hey, we're trying to stand up a new team to figure out what this business looks like in 5 years. And I got to know a lot about Pandora specifically, which is a different model than a lot of other companies, and just felt like it was a great opportunity for me to to take some of the lessons that I learned elsewhere and try to figure it out. And for me, it's been great. It's nice to be in a company that size where a lot of times strategy and corporate development deal people, you're kind of off to the side. Like, you're not core to the business. Whereas I think at Pandora, our team has really had a chance to define what the business looked like, whether it's through M&A, whether it's through strategy work, whether it's opening up new markets. So that's kind of how I wound up there. And in terms of getting up to speed, I've had a couple of conversations with folks about, my experience at W&L, how it's impacted, my work. And one of the things that I encourage folks, have encouraged folks this week is, your ability to continually learn new things is going to be the key to your career success. Like, you may be an Excel wizard, PowerPoint master chemist, whatever it is, but you can be sure that whatever skills that you get coming out of here are going to have to be replaced along the way. And for me, I took away, I had a pretty diverse experience here at W&L, and I think it gave me some confidence that I can go learn new stuff, fairly. I've got with some confidence, and so, for the music business, it's an apprenticeship. Every new industry you have to learn, but a fun one. It's weird and has a lot of, it's a regulated business, which I didn't fully grok when I took the job. It's like, you've got the FCC, you've got all the licensing rights are regulated. There's radio requirements. So staying flexible, staying agile, keeping an open mind.
Maybe one more question? Or no?
What about in 15 years, you see yourself being in the music industry?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt it. Not in a pure play music. I mean, I've had great experiences kind of being at the intersection of media and technology, and I love, I've been on the content side, CNN licensing stuff out, and now as a licensee. I don't know. We'll see. I'd love to stay in media and technology. It's something I'm really passionate about. It's fun. It's really intellectually challenging, and we'll see.
One of the things about these executive in residence visits is we put them through the ringer. Overscheduled, and so join me in thanking John. We're going to feed him.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Rob.